Hi, I'm Calum Franklin. I'm here with my friends Restaurant Kits, and today we're going to be cooking my pie kit. First step, what we're going to do is take a little bit of this butter and we're just going to grease the inside of this pie tin. Just trim a bit off the end and then we're just going to rub that on the inside. So the next step, we're going to take just about 20 grams of this flour out of this bag. That's going to be for dusting the bench later on. The rest of it we're going to stick in here for our dough. We're going to dice this butter into roughly 1 centimetre cubes. That's going to go into our flour for the dough. Now you're going to add your salt to that butter and flour. We're going to rub it together. So what we're looking for in terms of consistency when we're rubbing this flour and butter together is we don't want a completely even mix, right? That doesn't make a great pie dough. And what we want is little nuggets of fat in there. Now the sort of reason for that is lamination, right? So if you think of a puff pastry, that's like evenly laminated dough and butter layers, right? With a short crust pastry, we want a similar effect, but we want little pockets of that lamination. And that's created by these little nuggets of butter. So what happens is, when it's cooking, those little nuggets of butter will melt, and then the water that's in the dough and in the butter will create steam as it cooks, and then that will puff up that pocket, and that's how you get a flake of pastry. I've got my whole egg here, and then I've weighed out 120 grams of water, because that is 120 millilitres, right? I always find it easier to weigh water. So I want that really cold, so that when that goes into the dough, it shocks a bit of cold temperature into that butter and stops it melting. Okay, so we pour that in, and then pour in our whole egg, and just work that in, and we just want to see no more dry flour on the bottom of the bowl, and we know it's come together enough. So then you just gently bring that dough together. We're not overworking it, just little movements, and it will slowly absorb all that moisture and even out. Okay, so if we overwork this, if we keep kneading it, what that's going to do is it's going to just keep creating gluten strands, right? Strengthening those gluten strands. And that's kind of what you do when you make pasta dough. So you want that elasticity in pasta dough, but we don't want it in pastry dough. We want pastry dough to be short, which is where that word comes from. We're just going to break that into half, and then we're going to cut one of those halves in half again. Last thing we're going to do is we're going to wrap this tightly in cling film and pop it into the fridge to rest. So you can either put it in the fridge to rest for half an hour, or if you're clever, stick it in the freezer and rest it for half that time, because it does the same job. Okay, so whilst your pastry dough is resting in the fridge, let's line that tray with some baking paper, and that's going to be for your lid and for your lattice later on. Pastry's rested, so that's going to be for my base. That one is going to be for my lid. That one is going to be for my lattice. Now, if your pastry is really cold, you can do something called shocking pastry, right? That's not when pastry goes wrong. Shocking pastry is just getting a bit of heat into it using your rolling pin, okay? So all you do, just give it a whack and then turn it around. I've got a square pie tin, so that's what I want in terms of a shape, a large square. So you just start at the back of the dough, right? So I'm not starting over the edge, just about an inch in. Just a nice even roll forward, turn it 45 degrees. Same thing, start at the back, roll forward, turn it 45 degrees. Same direction every time. If you feel it sticking on the bottom, then just stop and dust a little bit more flour. And what we're looking for is about between a sort of ½ centimetre and 1 centimetre thickness for the base, so it's not too fragile, okay? Only roll one direction with your rolling pin, okay? Never, you see people sometimes rolling forwards, rolling backwards. You're literally just working against yourself. You're sort of rolling it out and then rolling it back again. So just always roll one direction away from you. So my pastry is almost perfect thickness. We're just gonna check the tin, okay? So I need to make sure that I've got enough pastry on the outside that it's gonna come up the side of the tin and leave a little lip. And you can just feel the dough over and feel if it's nice and even. If it's thicker in one part, then you just need to apply a little bit of pressure on that specific part as you roll. So I can feel it's a little bit thicker here. So as I roll over it, when I get to here, I'm just going to put a bit more pressure there. To line this, we want to get that square inside here, but we don't want to have creased edges, right? And there's a little secret trick to that. So all you're going to do is just cut a diagonal line out away, take off any extra flour. So we put it in halfway, okay, and then we just open that up, drop that in, and then just let that fall in. Where we've cut those corners, we can fold that over, and then it will drop in nicely. And then you just want to push that dough right down into the corner so we get a nice sharp edge on the pastry. Make sure that's right stuck down on the bottom. If there's any air bubbles in that base, then what you want to do is just push all the air out to one side and just gently lift away the pastry and let that air come out and then seal it again. And then where we've cut those edges, all I want to do here, just using my finger, we're just going to carefully squash that together now and join it at the top, okay? So we have an invisible seam on that corner. It's not going to open up when we cook. Now we're going to trim that so we've got 1 inch of border hanging over the side. The pastry that we made is called virgin pastry, right? It's the first time it's ever been used, first time it's ever been kneaded, so it's got that really short, flaky crust to it. Really, any trimmings, if you form it back together again, secondary dough, but it's still good for another pie. If you keep using it again and again and again and sort of re-rolling it, it will go elastic. So secondary pastry, wrap it up tightly, whack it in the freezer, and it's good for probably a couple of months in the freezer. Now that is ready, we're going to pop that into the freezer, and now we're going to roll out the lattice and the lid. So really for that one, I'm looking at a centimetre thickness, okay? So all we need to do is we just need to have the length of the pie, okay? We don't need to have the width, because when I use a lattice roller, this is gonna, if I cut that width, it's gonna open up to the width of the pie afterwards, okay? So I don't need to roll this pastry out to the full width of the pie, just the width of the roller. So that, what I've rolled is plenty, okay? So from there to there will be fine. So that's gonna go into the fridge now to rest a bit, get nice and cold before we roll it out. There's my lined tin. Because it's been in that freezer for a while, it's like fat has gone hard, it's gone rock solid, which means that we can put our mix in. It's not going to dampen the pastry at all, right? So we avoid the old soggy bottom. Next thing, grab our mix. So this is this pre-made mix for you. So lovely poached chicken thighs and then a sauce made from that poaching liquid. So we cook a roux. We add mustard to it, tarragon, and then some really beautiful shiitake mushrooms as well. Shiitake mushrooms poached in the same stock, so it's just flavours going into flavours, right? Exactly how a chicken mushroom pie should be. So we're just going to empty that straight into this pie base. Right, so next we need to put our lid onto the top of this pie. So in order to make sure that it seals properly, we're just going to put a bit of butcher's glue. Right, which, if you're in the know, butcher's glue is water, right? So just a little bit of water around the edge, just to dampen it. And we grab our lid from here. We can just pop that straight over the top. Doesn't matter if it is a bit bigger, because we're going to trim it anyway. You'll see that it kind of dips in to the pie a bit, right? The reason why we allow it to dip in and not pull it tight across the surface is because if it's tight, when it goes in the oven, the fat will get hot and it will get weak here, right? And it will potentially, the pastry will rip there as it kind of drops in. Because there'll be tension here, tension there, and it will break there. But if we allow a little dip already, it won't do that. Plus, as any steam is produced, it will puff up a little bit. Squeeze that lip and the lid together nice and firmly. We're going to trim this off so it's nice and neat, okay? So just feel where the edge of the tin is. We don't want to trim too much because we need to be able to crimp it. Right, so we're going to put the lattice on first, then we're going to crimp onto that lattice, okay? So the next step is a very light egg wash across the surface. To create a really beautiful egg wash, you need to have understanding of a couple of things. One is only use pure egg yolk, right? Never use whole egg. The reason why is because if I egg wash onto here with whole egg, when it cooks in the oven, you'll see the egg white. Right, it will cook the egg white and you'll see it as a streak instead of a beautiful glossy finish. For this one, we're going to give you pasteurized egg yolk, okay, which is beautiful, smooth product, has none of those little white bits in the chalazé off the egg. The other thing to understand about egg washing is you don't need to apply too much, right? If you put loads of egg wash on, just slap it on, essentially you're going to cook an omelette on the top of the pastry and it will never get crispy, right? So what you want to do is a very light brushing each time. So imagine you're painting your house at home. So you give it a nice thin first coat, you go into your other room, have a massive row with your missus, and then you come back and give it the second coat and allow it, right? And then that's how you give a really good egg wash. What you want when you roll your lattice roller through is that it's always in contact with the bench or whatever surface it is below. All right, so I'm just going to hold that in place. Then all I do is just keeping the cutter at 45 degrees, roll it forward just a little bit, about an inch. All right, and then we're going to stop, roll it back a little bit, and then go forward. So inch it forward each time, just going a little bit forward. This is the nicest way to control the lattice roller and make sure it doesn't warp the pastry, right? Then you can move your hand up a little bit, but don't push it down. Don't push the pastry down. You're going to squash it closed. We'll get all the way to there. And I'm going to stop and I'm just going to, you ready? This is a good bit. You just pop it off, right? Now, we're just going to trim that, okay? So that we've got across the top, take that bit off there, across the bottom, same thing. Basically the same width as one of those marks down the side. There. Okay, keep all your trimmings, like I said earlier. You can use that again for another pie. We need to check that this lattice opens properly, right? You check this before you put it on the pie, because otherwise we're going to tear it. I can see on my one, some of these haven't opened, right? So all you do, if you see one that hasn't opened, you just nick it with a knife, just very gently. Okay, because that lattice is that like little bit thicker pastry, it gives us a chance to sort of, you know, stretch it out, make sure it works. It's not going to split, okay? This is how we check it's going to go on nicely before we lay it on the pie. So now what we need to do is just gently push the edge of that lattice onto the pastry, and that's the part we're going to trap. Then we can start crimping. So a little bit like we did with lining the tin as well. Same thing, you're just going to snip a little bit into the corner here, a bit into the corner there. I'm going to egg wash a little bit over the top of this. It's a very light brushing. So for crimping, we're going to use both hands, right? So This hand is just going to be for using as a guide. This is going to do the work, right? So my left hand is going to be the guide, right hand is going to be the workhorse. Now, swap those over if you're left-handed, right? So all you're going to do, you're going to take your index finger and thumb, and you're going to turn that first corner, trapping that lattice, okay? And then all we do, the guide hand, you put your index finger just onto that pastry that you've turned over, okay? And then we do the work with this hand. So index finger and thumb, you just pinch that pastry where we turned it over, flatten it out, okay? And then we're keeping that finger there just as the guide, and you just roll the pastry over, back onto that lattice, okay? And then move your finger across one. So the guide finger just moves once each time. Flatten that pastry out, roll it on, guide finger moves over, flatten that pastry out, roll it over, guide finger moves over. And we just do that all the way around, and I'm just putting it on a very slight angle, okay? So it creates a sort of wave effect as it goes around. Now don't worry about it bunching here, because remember that lid is gonna puff up and then it'll have room to stretch. Once you've gone round and crimped, all you have to do now is just go and tidy it up a little bit. So just go around and just pinch those crimps nice and tight. Another really important thing is with this crimp is you don't want it hanging too far off the edge of the pie tin, okay? Because it will droop. No one likes drooping. Now that's ready to have another egg washed, and we're going to bang it in the freezer, let that go hard. So whilst that's in the freezer, let's get our oven turned on and get it warmed up. So this is going to be the final brushing, all right? So it's the second one on the lattice and on the crimp. And again, it's just very light, okay? Just a very light brushing. Okay, so chuck that in 200 degrees for 10 minutes. Now it's important, no tray underneath, right? We want direct heat going onto the bottom of the pie. So we're about 15 minutes away from that pie being ready. So last thing we need to do is make sure our side vegetables are cooking. So we've got our carrots here, they're slow roasted. Clapshot just needs to go into a medium-sized pan and just get warmed through. Right, so that's it, 45 minutes, veg should be ready. Clapshot's looking nice and hot, pie is coming out the oven. And then our clapshot here, like clapshot shouldn't be smooth, right? It should have nice chunks in it and have a texture to it. This has got some fresh picked thyme in there as well that's already in that recipe. And loads of white pepper and a bit of salt. And that's ready to go. Right, thank you for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed making this pie alongside me. I'm gonna eat my dinner now. I'm hungry, I hope you're hungry, and I will see you all next time for the next pie.